Microphone, please.
Microphone.
If the clerk want to call the roll.
Councilmember Du Bois. Councilmember Phil Seth.
Here.
Councilmember Fine.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Vice Mayor Niss.
Here.
Councilmember Koo. Mayor Scharf.
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka. Councilmember Wolbach.
Here.
8 present.
So we're here for a closed session with conference with the city attorney regarding
Move we
potential
go into closed session.
litigation. You move to go into closed session. We have a second.
Second.
All in favor, just vote. And that passes 8 to 0 with Councilmember Du Bois absent. All right.
Finish up that big part of it on Monday night will be interesting as well. This is from an editorial in the Palo Alto Weekly. Home stretch for the comp plan, more than a decade in the making. Updated long-range plans nears the finish line. If time spent on the project were the measures of its importance, the vision document of the city's decision over the last 12 years now is in the final phrase of the City Council review. It's almost twice as good as the one it will replace. Last time Palo Alto updated its comprehensive plan in 1998, after all, it's unprecedented at the time, 6-year effort was intended to be operational until 2010. The new refresh plan for approval in the next few weeks is the product of an 11-year process that began so long ago in 2006 that none of the current members of the council had even been elected. Along the way, the city manager, planning director, and planning staff have turned over, as have the city's Planning and Transportation Commission, the city body that was originally intended to lead the process and where the revision languished during the Great Recession. Long-range plans intended to be updated as conditions of community change, typically about every 10 to 12 years, are required by state law and are supposed to be the framework within zoning, development, transportation, and other policy decisions are made during that period. It's an expensive, time-consuming process for any city, but especially in Palo Alto, where so much importance is placed on achieving brand community engagement and, when possible, at least some consensus. Concerned that the process has lost momentum and visibility with the public, in 2015 the council decided to reset what was needed and form a citizen committee to work with staff to develop a draft document. After a few hiccups relating to the membership of the committee, the full group held 23 meetings and formed subcommittees, met 29 times over 2 years, all open to the public. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was satisfied, but all points of view were heard, and to a great extent, the outcome reflected the policy tensions and long-standing political divides in the community. In May, following sometimes cantankerous interim reviews, the City Council and the communities handed off its final draft, which was reviewed over the summer by the Planning Commission. A required EIR report has been completed, and now the council is in the process of its final review of the plan and the EIR. Mayor Greg Scharf is
And the first thing we have then is oral communications. Do we have any oral communications? No oral communications. Moving on, we have our first action item, which is a public hearing, quasi-judicial hearing. We have a staff report.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, City Council. This is not Groundhog Day, but you do have another retail waiver request.
It feels like Groundhog Day, doesn't it?
So let's see. This request is coming from the long-term leaseholder at 999 Alma, and similar to last night's discussion on Portage. This is an applicant who's requesting a waiver from the retail preservation ordinance. Unlike last night's item, the director did not make a decision on this application. It was referred to the City Council as provided for in the code, and that's what was done here. The same options exist to approve, conditionally approve, deny, or continue the matter. The subject property is located in SOFA 2, zoned RT 35. The lot and building is approximately 10,000 square feet. The Anthropology was the tenant that's been there for greater than 10 years. They are now located at the Stanford Shopping Center. There is no on-site parking, but the long-term leaseholder does have parking available at 100 Addison. Here's an aerial view of the site with the off-site leased parking to the left. The findings for approving the waiver, a demonstration that the retail or retail-like use is not viable, that the proposed use will support the local zoning and comprehensive plan, and that the proposed use will encourage the pedestrian-oriented activity and connections. Applicant is proposing that half the building be used for retail or retail-like uses, and the rear half of the building used for office. The applicant is responsible for providing information to support the claim. The applicant has provided a letter and some statements included in the packet, the 10-year history, the broker statement, and a map of the surrounding areas. Subject property is shown at the bottom. The yellow is the R1 zone, and the other color shown on the map is the SOFA 2 boundaries with some different land uses that have been identified. So we're asking that you conduct the hearing and take action on the proposed waiver request. Your action becomes effective immediately.
All right, so first I'll open the public hearing. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. Is any disclosures? I'll just start and say I don't think I've spoken to the applicant or anyone else on it. All I've done is visited the site. Anyone else?
I've shopped there.
You've shopped there. Councilmember Fine.
So I did speak with the applicant for a few minutes on the phone, nothing outside of the public record.
Councilmember Holman.
I know the site well, I visited often, and I don't know if this is subject to disclosure or not, but I also spoke with the broker.
Okay. Councilmember Fine, I just want to point out that your light, there we go. You put it back on. Do you want to speak again? Oh, no. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's what that was for. It's a little too early for that. The applicant gets to speak for 10 minutes if they'd like to. You don't have to take the whole 10 minutes. And is there any public comment on this? And since there's no public comment, there's unlikely to be a rebuttal. So if there's anything you want to say in the 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you. I'll make it brief. I know that I've been here before in front of you. My name is Christian Hansen. Maybe I can start with a little background on the property. My partner and I bought this building back in, the leasehold interest in this building back in 2014 with Anthropology as the tenant. They had a couple years of term left, and they had an option to extend. In 2015 is when the retail ordinance came into play, and shortly thereafter, Anthropology notified us that they would not be exercising their option, that they were going to move to the mall to a bigger footprint. So immediately we employed a broker. That same year in 2015, we signed a listing agreement with our brokers and started to market this building. Initially, I don't think we were, after talking to the brokers and hearing their comments that, hey, this is a downtown building and it's Palo Alto, we think that you'll have a lot of interest. We were kind of excited that we would find a tenant. But over the last 2 years marketing it, after the first few months trying to market it to a single tenant user, we found that there just wasn't really any retail user that was interested in a 10,000 square foot block of space. So then we instruct our brokers, okay, let's expand the net and let's tell everyone that we would be willing to demise the space. So they started to offer that to tenants. Furthermore, to maximize exposure, we told them, let's go out at an unpriced asking rate so that we could bring all viable offers. So we wanted to maximize the exposure and really look at every offer that came in. Unfortunately, fast forward 2 years, 22 months from the time we started marketing, we still do not have any offers on the building. We are doing everything we can. I mean, I need the council to understand that I went to every tour. I had weekly calls with my brokers. I am doing everything in my power that I know how to do to lease this building to a retail user, whether it's a single tenant retail user or multi-retail users. I'm doing everything I know how to do. Let me just flip here. I do have a couple slides. So this just goes through our marketing effort in 2015. We signed the listing agreement in 2016. Anthropology vacated. So the building's been sitting vacant now for about a year. And although we've had several tours and a lot of preliminary interest, when the tenants get out on site and they see the distance from where the building is to University Avenue or the retail corridors, that's about as far as we've been able to get any of these tenants. The people that have been interested, office users, we've had some dentists or small medical office users approach us about the building. Fitness groups have approached us about the building, and we've sent them down to the city. And I think one of the things that scared them off was the size was an issue. And then I think yesterday, Mayor Scharf, I think you were asking questions about commercial recreation uses, and it's a little confusing, and it's a CUP process. So when the tenant goes down and they ask, can I put my use here? The answer is it depends, and it takes several months to get to a point. So that does scare some away. We've also had restaurants that are interested, but the parking is just not it's not viable for restaurants. It's not approved use. There we go. There's some of our uses. You've seen this map. In white is the SOFA 2 zone. And as you can see, what's hard to see from this map is it's a very diverse tenant mix. And SOFA 2, as you know, is a coordinated area plan. It took 4 years. It was talked about yesterday. It took about 4 years to get this plan completed. And I think it took a long time because it's a very complex area. Our building in particular is flanked on both sides by office. So there are no retail users on our immediate block, which makes it challenging when tenants come out and they see that there's virtually no pedestrian traffic and that there's no other retail users. With this, I also included in the SOFA 2 zoning, it's pretty clear that I'm not, the code does not permit that I can have as much office as I want. It says that it enables, allows up to 5,000 feet of office. In this building, we envision 5,000 feet of office going in the building and having the frontage along Alma be marketed to either one or two or more retail tenants. So, in short, we respectfully request the ability to put 5,000 feet of office use, which also could accommodate our company in the future. And I just so that I've often thought back on this whole process. If I could go back 2 years ago, I've asked myself, would I have done anything different? Could I have foreseen this emergency retail ordinance in my building being caught in the net? Was I careless in how I assessed the risk of the building? And nothing, all the scenarios I look at, I can't think of any way that I could have foreseen this happening to this location. I wish I had. I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of an ocean and I'm treading water and I'm drowning and I'm literally asking for a life preserver. We will do everything we can to lease the 5,000 feet to retail, but to stay afloat and to tread water, I respectfully request that you consider allowing up to 5,000 feet of office as the SOFA 2 permits.
So before you go, I just have one question for you. There, in the staff report, it talks about that we have the choice of limiting that office as well to medical office.
Okay?
Is that something you can live with?
Yes, I mean, obviously it would preclude us from ever putting our office, but anything, yes.
Okay. All right.
You want to, or,
Oh, you have still have time.
sorry, there's no time?
No, there's time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's time.
Take a minute.
I thought you were done, so.
That's all right. I'm Robert Wheatley. I'm Christian's partner in this deal. And I think, you may think of real estate people as coming in, buying a property, then trying to get the use shifted or something. This is kind of the opposite. This is something where we came in, we bought the building with the SOFA 2 zoning. We thought it was reasonable. We thought we had good options to be able to manage the property. And then, the shift happened where we got restricted to a very limited use. If you think of kind of a Venn diagram, and you like to have, we had this great bar of uses we could do, and the market overlapped several of them, so we thought we're pretty good. But then we get all that adjustment area taken away, and now we're just this circle out here that says retail only, in a 10,000-foot building, and the market's kind of over here. So it's been a shift away from the market, a shift away from us that's hurt us, rather than us trying to, weasel our way into some other use or try to get the city to change something. I think Christian said it well, that we kind of got caught in a net. We're on the periphery of any retail zone. We don't have any neighbors in front of us and back of us, to the sides of us. We have no retail. We're kind of an island out here. Anthropology was kind of a unicorn that came along and was willing to try to go it alone because they're so popular. We haven't been able to replace that unicorn, and I don't foresee that we're going to be able to do that. This would just give us, what we're asking is for the flexibility that we had when we bought it, flexibility that was worked out carefully over years in the SOFA 2 zoning. We're asking to kind of just allow us to return to that, to give us the flexibility to be able to successfully market it. And once we get, if we are left with 5,000 feet of retail, that will be much more manageable to divide up and use effectively, and have the space along Alma, which they would covet much more than the back alley space, to use as retail. Thank you.
Thank you. So I agree that 5,000 square feet of retail is much easier to manage. We as a council, and speaking to my colleagues, have also talked about that we do need more small medical type space in the city, and that this is some of the uses that we're missing. Yeah, move my thing. So I will, just to kick things off, move that we, how do we put it? We put it that we grant the proposed retail waiver to allow half the site, 5,000 square feet, to be used as medical office space. Is that fairly clear to staff? Okay. All right, I'll just briefly speak to it.
You want a second?
Oh, fine, spoke to it. Fine, second. I totally believe that 10,000 square feet, and I think if we as a city want 10,000 square feet stuff, it's going to be the fitness type, what did you call it, community recreation, and I actually would be fine with this being community recreation, but we'd then have to go and fix our parking requirements for that, and I'm not sure this site has enough parking to actually do that. So I don't see how they could move in that direction. The only other use I can think of that's big enough for 10,000 square feet is restaurants. You can't put restaurants here. And then we're left with something like an Anthropology or something like that. And Anthropology clearly made its view known that it moved to the Stanford Shopping Center. And I think a lot of those kind of retailers, and I agree with the characterization that it's a unicorn and that it's really, really hard to find. With that said, don't expect to come back and get that 5,000 square feet of retail waived, because I, for one, would never support that. I don't know about my colleagues. So anyway, Councilmember Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. This is kind of a rehash of last night, and so I'll just go through my notes again. I voted against the citywide expansion of the retail preservation ordinance because that was designed for the downtown area, and this is clearly on the limits of that area. There's no other retail in the block except kitty corner internal is the creamery, right? So there's no other co-location of retail. This is not a great site for retail. The owners went out unpriced for the shop and didn't find any takers. I think that should be a strong indication to us that the market is not supporting retail at this location. I continue to believe that we are not going to see the local retail, quote unquote, that we want to see by further legislating and regulating the spaces here. Parking is a serious issue, as it was with the site last night. And I guess there's a broader question. Do you really believe that retail will survive here if we regulate it? What's our public purpose in trying to require this? Is it to punish the owner? Is it to have the building stay empty as it has for 3 years now?
A year.
1 year? Thank you. We all call this the Anthropology site, but as the mayor pointed out, Anthropology moved to Stanford Mall, where there's lots of retail. I think the mayor's proposal will allow the owners to make some income on the property that they bought in a reasonable way. Personally, I would be happy to grant the waiver overall. I don't know if that's where the council is over across all of us. Put simply, I just really don't think we're going to see the retail that we want by creating restrictions on retail sites. So I hope you'll support this tonight.
Vice Mayor Niss.
Well, I couldn't say it any better than Adrian just did. I understand the reason, or the rationale for splitting it, but absolutely, if we were to make this whole thing into office, I'd be fine with that. I'm rather surprised to see that we have nothing but office, in fact, a vacancy across the street, and then another office. I am surprised you all have lasted as long as you have, and even though I'm afraid I'm one of the ones that voted for the emergency retail, I would certainly love to revisit that. When we have sites like this, and there are several other sites on Alma that are the same, I think it's just regrettable that we've insisted on this being retail.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, I just also want to mention that I actually did meet with the applicant. The applicant came to my office hours, I don't know, 2 months ago. It's been a while. Let's see, in terms of this project, oh yeah, in terms of what was discussed, nothing that wasn't presented already. But in terms of this item, I think it seems to make sense to me, so I'll support the mayor's motion.
Councilmember Holman.
So I have a different thought about this, which is, well, one, I have different thoughts than apparently some colleagues do about the retail preservation ordinance. I have some different thoughts about this site. It's hard to make the finding that it's not a viable retail site when it was retail for 10 years as Anthropology, and it was retail before that. I think it was automotive sales, I think is what it was. Anthropology I don't view as a unicorn. I view Anthropology as destination retail. I've argued also that we need an economic development person. We need such a person who's a trained person who has, experience in that field to be able to help property owners in situations like this. I looked at Jonathan. So the council did grant a waiver for education across the street. Has that property been occupied, or what's the status of that?
Yeah, it was for a daycare / preschool, and I think permits were issued this month or last month for that use.
Okay. So I don't think that was the best use for that, but it is what it is. Now it's passed, and it is what it is. But I think what's really appropriate in situations like this is that people who own property look for somebody as a tenant that is sympathetic with the use across the street. And I'm sure you can think of those. Here's where my biggest issue is, and this doesn't make me happy to say this either, but here's where my biggest issue is. I don't like when property owners put an unpriced marketing approach out to the public because it's lacking transparency. And so I was wondering what was going on with this property because it was vacant for a long time. So probably, I'm guessing, about 6 weeks ago, I called the phone number on the sign and said, you know, wanted to inquire about 999 Alma. Clearly identified when he called back that it was the anthropology site. I was quoted $6 a foot. I promise you, I was quoted $6 a foot. That included triple net. This is not a $6 a foot location. Nothing was offered about negotiating the rate. Nothing was offered about demising the space. I don't find that as making something that's going to make me sympathetic to changing the rules on this property. And so, you know, I'd be open to reconsidering this after 6 months of transparent marketing attempts. But until that time, I can't because this is not a transparent way to market property. And there was no bad connection. There was no equivocating. It was $6 a foot. So that's the reason I can't support it, because I don't feel like it's transparent, and I won't go further than that, but that's where I am.
So, Councilmember Holman, I understand. I think I need to give the applicant a chance to respond to that, because we probably should have disclosed that as information.
I did say that I had spoken to the broker.
Yeah, but I think you have to disclose any information in the public record that would impact your vote.
But it was not a private discussion with the applicant. It was not a private discussion with a neighbor.
Okay.
So I don't know where the line is.
To respond.
I don't know where the line is, but it's all in the public record now.
Sure.
So I have my broker here, so I wasn't on the phone call, but
Yeah, and I don't know if you spoke with me or with my partner, Josh, but,
I don't know that he gave me a name.
okay. Well, our approach has been to take any and all offers. I don't know if there was a conversation of the type of use or if it was just
No, I just asked about, you know, the space and what was the rate, and that was the extent of the conversation. It's
Okay.
$6 a foot. It was triple net, no negotiating, and no demising of space was mentioned. It was a very brief conversation.
Okay, I can say that we have been taking a very aggressive approach in terms of taking any and all offers, splitting the space. We're marketing the space with multiple square footages, multiple, you know, demising scenarios that we have come up with. So I don't know if you talked to somebody else in our office that had that information, but we have it listed online as unpriced. We have tenants that have expressed interest that were worried about price, and what we've told them is market rent downtown is $6, $7. Market rent down, if you go down on El Camino, is closer to $3 triple net. We're somewhere in between there, and we're not trying to scare anyone away. We are open to seeing any offer for any tenant.
It doesn't explain why my experience was so very, very different.
Okay, fair enough.
And then I just want to add, I mean, again, I don't know if this. Yeah, we've tried to make, we've tried to pull in all offers. I don't know what to say other than that's not what I'm aware of, and that's not at all what we're trying to do. I'm trying to lease the space.
I would just say we've had several hour-long discussions in the space with multiple different tenants, from salons to other people who had an idea of what they could do, and we've spent an hour talking with them about how it could make it, and the discussions were at much lower rents. But we've had hour-long discussions trying to say, how can we make this work for you? Could this be a possible location for you? Let's get engaged in a discussion, and it never comes to, well, exactly what can we lower the rate? We would do it if you lower the rate. That's never been on the table. We never get that far because they find a more retail-friendly site somewhere else. So pricing just hasn't been an issue.
And the last thing to add is just that it never is a cut and dry rate. As you know, there's build out, when you have a building, there's build out scenarios. It's a lot different depending on who you're talking about. If someone comes and says, I want the space as is, that's different than someone that wants you to build, a salon for them or a big tenant improvement. So again, I would never, even in a transparent marketing scenario, I don't know if anyone, my broker, I would never quote that to someone.
There was no equivocating, there was no bad connection, there was no, I don't know what to tell you other than this was my experience, my personal experience. There was no lack of clarity in the conversation, so I don't know what to tell you.
I don't either.
All right, well, thank you. Councilmember Philseth.
I got a question for staff. Right? Thanks, John. So Hassett Hardware is a block away at Alma and Channing, and I think it's probably a similar size, about 10,000 square feet. That place has like 4 parking places, right?
Oh, that
right?
many?
Yeah. Including the ones across the street, right? Are they non-conforming? How can they have like?
So they're zoned RT50. They're non-conforming for parking, but
Okay.
the use would be fine.
I see. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Councilmember Walbach.
I think it was Councilmember Fine earlier asked about the goal. I think the goal of the Retail Preservation Ordinance is pretty clearly to prevent conversion of retail to office space. This motion, by limiting it to medical, I think I'm comfortable with that, and because it's only half. So I think I'm going to support this motion. If it was simply to grant it for all office, that would be a harder sell for me. I think this is reasonable. I would also be open to it being used for housing, frankly. I don't know if that's something that's been considered by the applicant. I don't think I'd be open to changing the whole thing, but I think I might even be open to the other half being housing, given what's in that area. It's mostly office and housing in that vicinity. On the question of the retail preservation ordinance in general, I don't think that's agendized to have a deep discussion about tonight. I'll just say, given our conversation last night and our conversation tonight, I do think that at some point, maybe we want to have a conversation about tweaks to make sure we didn't set our own ordinance up to be counterproductive, to set it up to fail, or to set retail up to actually make it harder for retail, especially through those parking requirements that we talked so much about last night. But that's not part of the agenda, but I figured since others had alluded to it, I figured I'd just mention that for future discussions. But yeah, I'll be supporting this motion. Not with a lot of excitement, but I do think that you've done the work to make the findings.
Councilmember Koo.
So how many parking spaces are allotted to this building?
So I believe the leaseholder has 15 spaces on 100 Addison,
I'm sorry, on where?
across the street on Addison.
Are those leased or are those yours? Are those the applicant's spaces? Is that lot theirs or, I'm sorry?
So there is a property owner who has provided a long-term lease to those parking spaces to the applicant.
I guess then, if it's a lease, how can we be assured that it's going to continue along with
Right.
the,
Good, yes. Thank you.
waiver?
So let me back up one step. So the anthropology building is a legal nonconforming building with respect to parking. There is no city requirement for parking. It just so happens that they have an arrangement for extra parking, a private arrangement for extra parking at 100 Addison. 100 Addison, for the new use that's going to be located there, is meeting their parking requirement, and there's still this surplus parking that could be used to support 999 Alma. But none of that's required by code.
Oh, I'm sorry?
But 999 Alma does not have any code-required parking.
Okay. Okay. So it's interesting, yesterday we had a chat about how we need housing, and we went through a housing memo and all that. And Vice Mayor Nis has reminded us time and time again that, throughout the campaign, it's always been about housing. And yet, the first opportunity we get is to revert it, again, putting something that is in preservation to change it over to office. While I understand and I've read through the report and I do see where you're coming from, I just find that, there's still a very high priority placed on office space. And we know that already we have a job and housing issue, yet it's perpetuated. So I just want to remind, while I agree with most of what Councilmember Wolbach had said, it'd be nice if you could change it to housing, but I also see that that might not be within the code. RT 35 does.
Housing is a permitted land use.
It is permitted.
Yes.
Well, so certainly, hopefully, that might be a consideration, although hopefully that would be a consideration also. And then lastly, I just want to ensure and have it on record that you did say, the applicant, that you did say that you were going to be putting whatever the changes to the back of the building, so still allowing for the front where there's all the glass for retail. Is that so? Yes. Mayor, can I just have him say it on record?
Sure, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
And just so you know, you could condition that as part of your approval, if that were necessary.
Yes, I'd like to add that the change that the applicant proposes for whether it's office or residences, that is at the back of the building. Towards the alley.
Yeah, so the rear half of the building, I'm following you. And so I guess the other part of that is the, yeah, no, I'm good. So housing, if they wanted to explore that, that would be permissible if the waiver were granted for the rear half. That would be fine.
Oh, so right now the waiver is only for the medical office, not for housing.
Oh, that's right. I guess you're saying
Yeah.
it's for medical office, but maybe you want to consider housing too.
I don't actually. I want this to have ground floor retail. So I don't, but.
And I'm fine with it.
No, I'm quite happy with second and third floor housing on this. I think that would be totally fine if they want to redevelop it.
To code.
Right, I mean, I personally think that 5,000 square feet of ground floor retail in this space is a good thing to have. And I actually, while I'm speaking to it, since you raised it, I actually think there's a shortage of small medical office space.
I agree.
In the community, and this is not turning it into, and I'm actually glad that we're going to have some community serving stuff that we need. I view medical office that way. I want to be able to drive to my dentist.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
When you say medical office, does that mean dental and also psychiatrists and therapists, those sort?
Yeah, all of those examples would qualify.
Qualify, okay.
All right. We're now going to do another round. We have about a half an hour left, so if we could just keep our second round short. Councilmember Fine.
Okay, just a few points I want to respond to. One, the desire to have housing here is actually stopped by our retail preservation ordinance. If these guys wanted to do housing on the ground floor there, our current ordinance prevents that, right? And we would have to grant a waiver for housing or for a gym or for a gas station or whatever the heck we wanted to see happen there.
Heaven
So-
forbid a gas station.
Heaven forbid. So I'm just pointing that out. Two, to respond to Councilmember Koo, just because housing is not there and that this may be a viable space for office doesn't imply that we're necessarily against housing at that location. It's currently prevented because of the ground floor retail protections. And third, I just want to float this as a point of discussion. Last night and tonight, we've had some anecdotal evidence, and I don't want to doubt you, Councilmember Holman, at all in terms of the parking issues at 425 last night or at this spot tonight. I do think we have to be careful about introducing those at a council meeting. I could have called these folks and offered them 15 or 30 bucks a square foot, and they would have said, yippee. So I just want to float that it's important for us to couch our anecdotal experiences with individual properties, their parking, their rental rates, and all that in Palo Alto, with the fact that we have an obligation to look at our code, the public record, and the market as visible to all of the public in terms of how we make these decisions. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Holman.
I was just going to say, I can't support it for the reason I mentioned earlier, but if it was going to be something else, I'm glad that this is what it is.
All right, Councilmember Niss, or Vice Mayor Niss, sorry.
As long as we've gotten into the residential aspect of it, what could actually be allowed there, Jonathan? Let's say we were to put in the requisite retail on the ground floor, which we've now said can be half office. What could be added above that, even though, as Adrian has just pointed out, we also have a retail ordinance that wouldn't allow them to do that and do it with housing, but let's just wave our magic wand and say we could. How much housing could you actually get at that site? Okay. Square footage, not how many condos or whatever.
Okay, well, I don't have a magic wand for mathematics in my head, so I'd have to look at the code and figure out what those numbers are, and I can do that for you this evening. But Councilmember Fine is correct. On the ground floor, residential will not be allowed except for if a waiver were granted. Certainly, a second story or third story addition to the building, if it could be retrofitted to accommodate that, would be allowed. There's provision for off-street parking, and with the long-term lease, presumably those types of things would be permissible.
Well, I'd certainly say Councilmember Koo went in the right direction, saying we've been talking about housing. Maybe there are more opportunities that we have to say to an applicant, have you ever thought about housing there? Have you ever thought about keeping the ground floor in one way and adding housing otherwise? So I don't think we've had that conversation with the applicant very often, and it's probably one we should have. So be interesting to know just what we can put there, and I'm going to presume they could go to 50 feet, correct? I don't remember all of the SOFA requirements, but I think they can go to 50 feet.
Councilmember Walbach.
A couple of things. Just looking at the text, I'm a little concerned about the way this is phrased, and although I think I understand our intention of how we discussed this and the amendment that was added, I'm worried about the wording. I'm worried that this says, and if somebody's looking at this, a couple of years in the future, and maybe there's turnover in staff or council, they might read this to say that if a prospective tenant came in and said, hey, I'm interested in renting the whole 10,000 for retail, this says require non-retail uses at the rear of the building, so that might preclude that. So I would actually suggest that we change the wording to just, instead of a semicolon, just say at the rear of the building. So get rid of the semicolon and require non-retail uses. So it would say to allow 5,000 square feet of medical office at the rear of the building.
That's acceptable.
Yeah, just so that way, if you find, as you put it, another unicorn, you find another a tenant, you'd have that option. Also, for that area that is exempt, that 5,000 square feet at the rear of the building, I don't know if the maker and the seconder would be interested in saying medical office or residential. So that way they'd have it as an option.
You mean residential on the ground floor?
Yeah, for that ground floor. So they could do the retail in the front and residential in the back. So it wouldn't change the retail half. It would just give them basically two options instead of just the one.
I mean, at this point, we might as well just grant a waiver.
Well, what I don't want is regular office space there. I think that was important. I'm not making the motion, just,
You know,
I'm floating
I
the
don't
idea.
quite see how you retrofit this building. I don't understand how residential fits in the back of the building, frankly. It makes no sense to me.
Is it not conceivable in the current structure of the building? I haven't toured the site well enough to
I
know.
don't think so. I wouldn't want there to be like, well, I mean, you'd have to probably have had code to meet our Jonathan, I don't know, this, I don't think this makes sense, frankly, but I'm unclear.
Right. So there would be a number of upgrades that would be required for the building. Parking would have to be addressed, but presumably could be. I don't know that, there may be some other development standards that I'm not thinking about, such as open space or things like that, where there may be some technical challenges related to it.
And I guess I'm not really okay if we just decided, they decided to retrofit one unit of residential in a loft back there. I think I'd rather have the medical dental, frankly. So look, I guess what I would say is, I don't want to put this in now, but if you guys came back with a plan to put it in the back of the residential, you might get a positive feeling. But I don't want to just agree now.
Through the mayor, could I ask the applicant a question?
Sure.
Have you considered adding residential in that back half of the property? And do you have any thoughts about it?
We haven't considered trying to retrofit into a warehouse a couple of units at the back. I think if you wanted retail here, it would be an additive thing, and you would probably have to go down with parking. It's probably a total
You mean
gut
residential?
of the residential. I think it'd be a gut of the building. It would be underground parking. It would be some limited retail along the frontage with uses that were, sympathetic to the new retail. Maybe it's things that they would use, the residents and walking traffic, and then you'd have floors above with residential. And I don't know that we could just add.
Yeah, and then just to add, I think your thinking is right, though. It's probably not us at this time, maybe several years down the road, when you try to redevelop this building, the retail ordinance, trying to redevelop with a 10,000 square foot retail requirement would prohibit anyone from redeveloping. But if you do add, like you said, that language in, it just enables either us in the future or developer to not be restricted to 10,000 feet of retail. So it's more likely that it'll happen.
Well, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of appetite tonight for making that an amendment to this motion, but we've talked about it in the meeting. It's on the record that we'd probably be open to a future attempt, if there's interest in yourself or a future owner, in adding or redesigning the building in some way to have some residential on the property. That, again, looking at what's in the area, that doesn't seem, unreasonable, and that's allowed in the zoning. I kind of like the building, so I'm not saying tear it down, and it doesn't sound like you're interested in doing that either, so that's good. So that's it for my comments. I'll support this motion as it is now.
Councilmember Koo?
I just want to state also, the retail preservation ordinance is working. It works very well because it has kept a lot of retail stores in place and has not been converted to office, which is something that we're trying to grapple with in this city. In each case, yesterday's case and today's case are two different separate cases, and yesterday it was very stated clearly that it was not precedent setting. That's why we have the waivers in place for you to come forward to see if we can help you with that. But I do want to state that it is working very well, and thank you.
All right, I'm going to let...
Can I just respond to the questions, and then I have one more request?
No. Yeah, of course.
So the height limit is 35 feet for this particular building. For a mixed-use project, if you kept the same ground floor square footage, you've got roughly another 2,500 square feet that you can add to the building. We would require a minimum of 3 units, so 3 units could be added at a second floor, each roughly about 850 square feet. Those are gross numbers. There's a lot of stuff that goes into whether that would stick. And then just wanted to, maybe some of you saw one of the applicants, Robert Wheatley, come and talk to me, and he made a comment, and I think it's probably worth noting. This dividing line across the building, it may not be a straight line. There may be some jogging of that line as we accommodate bathrooms and storage areas, but the intent, as I understand it, is that the front half toward Alma will be used for retail or retail-like uses.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's the intent. Okay. Councilmember Fun.
Just one thing I need to respond to, Councilmember Koo. If you have evidence that the retail preservation ordinance is keeping retail operations in their spot and preserving the retail that we want to see in Palo Alto, I would encourage you to bring it here to the City Council.
No, I'm going to comment on it and support you, and then we're going to quit, because I get the last word. So I actually agree with Councilmember Koo in that I believe the retail ordinance is working really well, and that we are preserving retail, and that you only lose retail. And I mean, I hate to harp on things we talked about, but we didn't need to lose Rudy's, we didn't need to lose Zbibo's spot, we didn't need to lose the pizza place. What was it called? What? Spot. The pizza spot. The pizza. No, Spot Pizza's still there. No, it was the kitchen, California Kitchen.
Oh, Cal Pizza Kitchen.
California Pizza Kitchen.
House of Bagels.
House of Bagels. So, I'm going to say that I think that there is a bunch of retail that gets saved by this, and I think office does make more sense. But the fact that we're seeing the corner cases come to us, I think that means it's working. And I gave this some thought. Is I really strongly support retail, and I think a lot of my colleagues up here do. And when these corner cases come to us, I don't feel the need to be rigid in my thinking about it, and just the fact that we grant the waiver doesn't mean I don't support retail. And I think the fact that we are moving in this direction shows that we are a thoughtful council and responds to applicants when they come with us with concerns. And I think that's the way it should be. So I appreciate all the comments of my colleagues, and if we could vote on the board. And that almost passes. No, unanimous. That's on a, what is it, with count, it's 6-2 vote with Councilmember Filseth and Holman voting no. All right. On to the next item, which is speed limits.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Joshua Mello. I'm the Chief Transportation Official for the City of Palo Alto. To my right is Ruchika Agarwal, who is a member of our Traffic Safety and Operations team within the Transportation Division, and Chris Sine with the consulting firm that helped prepare the traffic and engineering speed surveys that we'll be discussing tonight. And we also have Chief Watson in the audience if any questions come up regarding police operations. So just to give you a little bit of background on setting speed limits in California, and I'll go through this quickly. There are two options for setting speed limits in California. The first is prima facie speed limits by statute. These can be 15 miles per hour in school zones or railroad crossings and 25 miles per hour in business and residential areas. And these are set by ordinance. They don't require any kind of survey by radar or any other analysis. And what defines a business district is 50% or more of the frontage occupied by businesses within a certain linear stretch of roadway. And then a residential district is 13 or more homes along a similar linear stretch of roadway. Where this causes an issue in Palo Alto is streets that have more than one lane in each direction or are over a certain width cannot be, speed limits cannot be implemented using this option. So this causes some issues on our residential arterials like Charleston and Arrastradero, Middlefield Road, and Embarcadero Road. Those are technically not considered residential districts under the California state law eligible for the prima facie speed limit because of the width of the roadway and the multiple travel lanes. So the second option for setting speed limits on these types of roadways is to use what's called an engineering and traffic survey, and this is where a traffic engineer during free flow conditions, not during rush hour, uses a radar gun, a certified radar gun, to determine what the average speed is, the 85th percentile speed. That's the speed at which 85% of motorists are traveling at or below, and that is used to determine the speed limit that can be posted on that roadway and enforced by radar, and it's typically rounded up or down to the nearest 5 mile per hour increment. These engineering and traffic surveys expire after 5 years. Jurisdictions can extend them from 7 to 10 years. So some of our surveys were expiring back in 2016. That's what initiated this entire effort. So back in 2016, we actually conducted the engineering and traffic surveys for 70 roadway segments in Palo Alto. These are primarily collector streets, residential arterials, and arterial streets. The surveys validated the posted speed limit for 56 of those segments. So we have the ability to certify 56 segments for radar enforcement at the current speed limits, so we don't have to make any modifications. We can certify those, and the police can go out and start using radar enforcement. However, on 14 of those street segments, the speed surveys show that there was a differential between the posted speed limit and the operating speed, thereby preventing us from using radar enforcement on those roadway segments. This is a map that shows the current speed limits in the city of Palo Alto. Everything that is not colored is 25 miles an hour. So we generally have a citywide speed limit of 25 miles an hour unless otherwise posted. And we have that posted, we have other speed limits posted primarily on arterial streets, not the residential arterials like Middlefield and Embarcadero. Those are also generally 25 miles an hour. The highlighted segments here in the yellow and the purple, those are the segments that were not able to be certified using the engineering and traffic surveys. So the ones that are shown in purple would need to be increased to 30 miles an hour if we wanted to do radar enforcement. And the ones shown in yellow shading would need to be increased to 40 miles an hour if we wanted to do radar enforcement. So as part of this effort, we did have a round of public engagement. We wanted to tackle this a little bit differently and not just do a technical exercise of radar data collection and then bring you the report without any kind of community feedback. So if you remember, last year in November, we went to both Planning and Transportation Commission and City Council, and we conducted study sessions to determine what some of your thoughts were on these engineering and traffic surveys before we decided to advance any kind of ordinance or resolution. Subsequent to the PTC and City Council study sessions, we went out to the community in March. We had two meetings. We had a North Palo Alto meeting and a South Palo Alto meeting. And it was a workshop format where we presented people with the findings of the engineering and traffic surveys, and we talked about if they had, we discussed whether they had an appetite for increasing the speed limits to conduct radar enforcement. And generally, the public was not supportive of increasing the speed limits on the residential arterial streets. However, they were open to making striping changes, adding speed feedback signs, looking at some types of traffic calming that's compatible with residential arterial streets, additional crosswalks, median islands, landscape medians, things of that nature. So we talked in great deal about some of the specific roadways. We had a very long conversation about University Avenue heading towards 101 and some of the issues that the folks in the Crescent Park neighborhood have observed along University Avenue. And there was general support for reducing the speed limits in the school zones, which I'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation. So our recommendations this evening are to certify the posted speed limit for the 56 segments that were found to be in line with state law and eligible for radar enforcement. We are recommending increasing the posted speed limit on only 2 roadway segments, these being Deer Creek Road from the western city limits to Arastradero Road. This would go from 35 miles an hour to 40 miles an hour. And then East Bay Shore Road from Embarcadero Road bicycle and pedestrian overcrossing to Adobe Creek. And this would be increased from 35 to 40 miles an hour. These segments are relatively isolated from residential neighborhoods. They're not part of any walk and roll routes for any schools within Palo Alto. The abutting land uses are very low density, lots of parkland. In the case of East Bay Shore Road, instead of recommending an increase all the way from Embarcadero to San Antonio, we are instead recommending the increase only in the center segment where there's a separate shared use path that can be used by bicyclists and pedestrians. They don't need to be, they don't have to use the existing bike lanes that are on East Bay Shore Road. Those bike lanes are continuous, but the shared use path is only within the segment that we're recommending. There's no sidewalk on the west side of East Bay Shore Road, so there's no pedestrian crossings occurring in that segment either. So we thought it was a wise decision to recommend increasing the speed limit on that segment. We're also recommending extending the 25 mile per hour school zone speed limit from the current 500-foot radius to 1,000 feet. And we're now able to do that under California state law. This is a law that was passed in 2012. And then we're also recommending reducing the speed limit to 20 miles per hour within school zones within 500 feet of the school grounds. You could also elect to reduce that to 15 miles per hour, but we really feel like 15 miles per hour is unrealistic from an enforcement perspective. These are the streets that would be changed. There's several maps that are included in the presentation. We analyzed the street network surrounding all of the public schools in the city of Palo Alto. We did not look at private schools, but if council wanted to direct us to implement the same speed limit changes in areas surrounding private schools, we could do that as well. That would need to be part of the ordinance. And then finally, we're recommending establishing target speeds. So this is a relatively new practice. This has nothing to do with enforcement. It has to do with the way we design our streets. So we would adopt target speeds of 25 miles per hour for the streets that are listed here. These are primarily residential arterial streets. And what this would do is it would formalize the target speed and enable us to make design decisions around that target speed of 25 miles per hour, thereby ultimately reducing the operating speed along the corridor as we implement these design changes. And then we could resurvey the roads after some of these design changes are implemented and perhaps certify the road for radar enforcement, because we would have reduced the operating speeds down to the point where they'd be eligible under state law for radar enforcement at the current speed limit. So some of the things that we would consider, and we've talked to the residents specifically along Middlefield Road in the Midtown neighborhood and Crescent Park, University Avenue and Crescent Park. We had quite a long conversation about some of the treatments that we could consider on those 2 roadways. Here's a list. I won't go through all of them, but I will tell you we've already seen success in this along Middlefield Road between Lowell and Oregon Avenue. We reduced the travel lane width down to 10 feet just using striping. And we created some temporary curb extensions and designed some of the tapers on the road at 25 miles per hour. And just through that restriping that was done through the resurfacing, we saw a 4 mile per hour reduction along that segment of Middlefield Road. So these type of treatments can reduce the operating speeds and potentially get us to a point where we could certify the roads for radar enforcement. This is a chart that shows the effect of lane width reduction. So wider travel lanes generally encourage higher travel speeds. So just by restriping the road and visually narrowing the travel lane, you can actually reduce travel speeds. Some other immediate next steps, we've already started moving forward on the left. You see speed feedback signs. We've recently upgraded 7 of those. 7 speed feedback signs. We replaced ones that were not functioning properly and others that were had become just static speed limit signs. And we're about to roll out another 12 new speed feedback signs. And these are generally in areas where we see higher operating speeds or gateways where people are entering the city and there may be a different speed limit in the jurisdiction nearby. We're also moving forward with installing citywide speed limit signs at the gateways into the city, and this would be citywide speed limit unless otherwise posted. As I mentioned, the vast majority of the streets in Palo Alto are 25 miles an hour. So we want to let people know that, you know, Palo Alto is a little bit different. Our residential arterial streets are 25 miles an hour, and this would be, these signs would be installed at the key gateways into the city to provide that notification for motorists. And with that, the staff recommendation is included in your staff report. There is an at places memo that was delivered to you that has an updated ordinance that cleans up some of the streets around the schools and also cleans up the description of Deer Creek Road to define it as the western city limits to Arastradero Road. There is one additional change that needs to be made, and that's the segment description for East Bayshore Road. It should read East Bayshore Road from the Embarcadero Road bicycle and pedestrian overcrossing to Adobe Creek. In the ordinance, it currently reads from the Baylands frontage to San Antonio Road. So that's the only other modification that we would recommend to the ordinance. And with that, we're here to answer questions.
Do we have any public speakers? Vice Mayor Ness.
In that case, I would move approval of this and read the recommendation off if I get a second.
I'll second it.
Hesitation on speed limits, amazing. And that should include the changes that you just read, Josh, at the same time. So this is brave of you to take this on because many times people have suggested changing speed limits in Palo Alto, and many times they have not been successful. I hope this one is tonight. In particular, the Deer Creek Road, which is surprisingly well-traveled and surprisingly traveled very fast. So that one in particular. And I'd say congratulations on changing the speed limit within school zones, although at many times of the day you couldn't even go 20 miles an hour if you tried to. So that one I would say is good, but it's pretty hard to speed around those schools anytime or an hour before or after the time that they start. Also, target speeds for certain arterials and residentials. I thought that was very interesting through roadway design. And after we get through this, you might also say something to us about how the road diet has worked on Middlefield. When I've driven it, it seems to work well. And then find these actions exempt for review under the California Environmental Quality Act under CEQA and so forth. So I think this is a very good report. But secondly, I also found on page 3 what's fascinating is these are the same streets that we've had discussions about any number of times as far as changing the speed limit. And essentially you have said it doesn't work to change the speed limit on those 14 streets, which is page 3 and page 4. That's it.
All right. Yeah, thanks for all this hard work. I know you've been working on this for a really long time and trying to get it. Yeah, I also think that, you know, you did the community outreach. How many people came to the community? I mean, are we talking, you know, are we talking like 10 people show up, or are we talking hundreds show up?
No, it was a handful at each meeting, but they were highly engaged, and it was people that had this concern, you know, throughout their time in Palo Alto. So they had a lot to tell us, lots of observations about the particular roadways.
So, you know, the only question, I even hesitate to bring it up in some ways, but, you know, Embarcadero is one of the main ways you get across the city. And I just want to know, I don't want you to do anything to Embarcadero to make it, you know, more congested or more difficult to travel than it is. And, you know, to be honest, I actually think 30 miles an hour might be the right thing on Embarcadero. I do worry about how people get out. I was going to ask you that question, is coming out at 30 miles an hour, is that something that's really difficult? It might be. So I don't know. I was curious about it. You know, I mean, with everything else, I totally agree. And I think Middlefield should be 25. I think the rest of them. But Embarcadero, I do wonder about. So I actually wanted to hear from a traffic engineering as opposed to the feedback from the 10 people who live there who came out to talk about it.
So Ruchika and Chris might have something to add, but I would say I would reaffirm that the type of treatments we're talking about are not dramatic things like speed humps or road diets, or, you know, in the case of Alma, we will be bringing forward some lane reconfiguration for the section downtown. But generally, we're talking about things like median islands that will slightly divert people you know, the goal would be to get them to travel at a moderate speed fluidly along the corridor with not a lot of starts and stops, but keep them at a nice, smooth speed.
Right, it's the stops that destroys the traffic.
Yeah, so these would not be, we would not be introducing new traffic signals or anything that would add additional stopping and going. It would be more about moderating the speeds. And we pay particular focus to the sections that have the higher travel speeds. But for Embarcadero, things we've talked about is just adding an edge line. So if you're coming from 101, there's technically a parking lane, but it's very underutilized. So that outside lane feels 15 feet wide, 20 feet wide in some places. So just by adding an edge line and tightening that up, it would, you know, moderate the speeds a little bit in that outside lane. We've already added a speed feedback sign on Embarcadero just past Newell. 2 actually along Embarcadero. So these are going to be minor treatments. It's not going to be anything that's going to really impact motorists from a congestion perspective.
You didn't answer my question about going to 30 miles an hour on Embarcadero, whether or not that's safe with people pulling out or not. I'm curious. Yeah,
pulling out of driveways?
Yeah, pulling out of driveways, because, I mean, otherwise the question is, you know, why not go to 30 miles an hour?
Well, I think the speeds that we documented on Embarcadero around. So that, yeah, the 85th percentile on some segments of Embarcadero is 37 miles an hour. So people are already going 37. So if we were to set it at 30 and then do intensive radar enforcement, we could actually, you know, may see the average speed go down.
Well, right, no, but that's my question, because 25 on Embarcadero seems a little low to me, frankly. I mean, so I mean, I'm really raising the question about,
well,
you know, if we got it to 30 and we then enforced it rigorously and did that, is that a more reasonable option than telling people they really need to drive 25 on Embarcadero, which, frankly, you pull in there, you know, there's no cars on the road at night, and, you know, I think going 25 could be difficult for a lot of people, and I think that's why you're seeing those higher speed limits.
So increasing it to 30 is an option that's available to the council this evening. I would say that you feel like it's hard to go 25 because of the design of the roadway, and our goal would be to you know, make it feel more like a 25 mile an hour roadway through design changes, and that's what the target speed is about.
Okay. And then I had one other question as I'm asking about this stuff. You know, when I drove on North California, now, it feels really almost unsafely narrow. You know, when another car comes down, I'm literally going, you know, like 15 miles an hour. I'm not, and yet that road feels very, very narrow. You're not planning on narrowing our roads like that.
So the width of that road was actually not changed. That's, you know, the goal of that design was to make people slow down, and it seems to be working, but the actual width of the travelway was not reduced. We actually shifted the white lines over, and by removing the center line, you take away that guidance that people feel, and they actually have to pay a little more attention, and it feels a little more uncomfortable when a vehicle is passing in the opposite
Right, no, it feels
direction.
uncomfortable when a vehicle
Yeah.
passes, even if you're doing it at a slow speed. Well, I mean, that may be the point, but I mean, the point is that it's actually uncomfortable, and I think it's uncomfortable if you're an older driver and that, and, you know, I mean, North California, you should be going really slow, but I mean, I'd hate to see that on Embarcadero, for instance, anything like that.
No, as I said, all we've really talked about for Embarcadero is adding white edge lines to define the travelway and define the parking lane, and then some
So-
speed feedback signs.
So what other roads are you thinking of making like North California, where you have that uncomfortable feeling when you pass somebody?
So North California is unique because it's a residential street with bicycle lanes.
Right.
So all of the other streets in that neighborhood do not have center lines, but they don't have bicycle lanes, so the curb is actually your guide, or the parked vehicles. North California feels a little odd because
Because of the bicycle lanes.
Because of the bicycle lanes. So the short answer is there aren't many streets like that in Palo Alto that would, you know, we would look at that same type of treatment.
Okay, no, I think that's good. So I actually wanted to say, I thought you thought this through really well, and, you know, I thought it was great staff work, and, you know, and I'm going to support it. Thanks. Councilmember Holman.
So yes, thank you for the work very much, and thank you for listening to the community. Couple of three things. I didn't find College Avenue. What's the tracked speed on College Avenue in College Terrace? The reason I ask about that is because it's a very wide street. Councilmember Tanaka is very familiar with it, of course. It's a very wide street with no trees in the middle, no medians, no anything, and people speed on it. So what was the determination there? And what's the plan for that street?
So I believe College Avenue is a local street, not a collector, residential arterial or arterial, so we did not conduct an engineering and traffic survey on College Avenue this go-round.
Okay, all right.
Because it's eligible for that prima facie 25 mile per hour speed.
So there's no plan for making any improvements there, any calming matters there then either?
Not as part of this study. We didn't look at identify improvements, but if you have any ideas, we'd certainly be open to.
I think if you haven't, I mean, you probably have. I think you've been around a lot of this town, but if you go check out that street and how people, it's kind of a speedway. It really is. So, so that's one. Another is, and Vice Mayor Niss may remember this, but I think if the speed limits on Embarcadero were increased, I think Yuriko Kishimoto would run for council again. That's what got her to run for council the first time.
As long as she's opened it up, I have seen this chamber jammed when we suggested going to 30 miles an hour. It is not a very popular position to take.
It's not. I just want to put a little history down there for you, for the mayor. I have another question, and definitely, I support almost all of this, but I have one question. I feel like the real curmudgeon tonight. But I have a question, which is, we got in this situation because we haven't been enforcing the speed limit, so the speed limit, the speed at which people have been traveling has been growing or increasing, and so we can't enforce the roadways with radar. So if we increase the speed in these two segments that are suggested, are we going to enforce them? We don't, I'm always told that we don't have traffic officers out there, so why are we doing it if we can't enforce it, or are we going to enforce it? And if so, what kind of money do we have appropriated for staff to be out there to enforce?
Mayor, council members, Ron Watson from the police department. I think the short answer is right now we can't enforce it, and if you do this, we can. As to how much we can enforce it right now without having a traffic team, that's certainly a limitation. But our patrol officers can work radar, and if you put it out there, they will go work it more than they are now. The other thing is I've been working with the city manager, and the last couple of months we have deployed some traffic units on an overtime basis to fill some of the gap of not having our traffic team. So certainly if these are certified as new roadways, it'll be one of their efforts to go out and start enforcement with them. So right off the bat, people will see cops out there, so hopefully they'll slow down.
So I guess, can I get a little bit more specificity on that? So, you know, is it going to be an ongoing effort? Is it going to be like, we're going to change the speed limit and traffic officers will be out there for a while? Or there'll be somebody out there once a week? Or, because we don't have the dedicated staff. So that's why I'm questioning about this. Or is there a real basis for increasing the speed limit? That's, I mean, I understand there's a practical thing about you can enforce it with radar if it's increased. That's the tactical, but I'm asking about the practical.
Well, I think practically it's always going to be priorities, and you know, the city manager's made it a priority for us with the overtime that we've done to be in the downtown area, the Middlefield corridor, in the road diet zones, and then also around the schools. But certainly during the times of day when the schools aren't in and we're rotating through the other stuff, it'll be, I think his favorite word is episodic.
Okay, maybe that'll be enough to get people to comply.
If I could just jump in here, the
Jonathan.
85th percentile speed on Deer Creek and East Bay Shore ranges from 44 to 47 miles an hour right now. And that's with a 35 mile an hour speed limit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm aware. I did read that. So, well, I'm going to support it. I just have that one concern about, like I said, it's the practical versus tactical. We'd have more police officers that could attend to other things if they weren't spending so much time at the corner of Middlefield and Forest. There was another wreck there today. And it's near me, so I experience them sometimes. And about 8 or 10 days ago, there were 2 wrecks in the same day. So there's a lot of time spent at that intersection. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but there's a lot of time spent at that intersection. So I'm sure you know about that, John. I keep calling you Jonathan tonight. I'm so sorry. Don't know why. But anyway, okay. Thank you for answering the practical question.
Councilmember Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be brief, I'm going to support the motion. 2 quick questions for staff, maybe for our chief. Some of this is predicated on the fact that radar is the best way to enforce speed limits, and I want to kind of put that to test. Is radar enforcement really our best enforcement mechanism to control speeds?
I think it's the most accurate way to do it, and it's also the most safe way to do it. It's much better to sit at the side of the road with a very accurate tool to gauge speed and not be chasing cars to try and pace them. And in some locations, it's really impractical. You can see us coming a mile away. So there's a lot of practicality to it, and then also it's clearly the safest way to do it.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. And then the second question, thank you for the illustration of the green signs. I don't expect a yes or no answer here. But for motorists from out of town or even Palo Altans used to just, speed limit signs being posted in white or something like that, do we expect or anticipate anybody being confused by these new green signs?
The speed limit sign, those are 2 separate signs. The sign on top was just to let people know that they're entering Palo Alto, and the sign below is telling them that our citywide speed limit is 25 miles an hour, unless otherwise posted. The one below will look similar to a standard speed limit sign. And these are used in other cities that have a similar philosophy around a citywide speed limit.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Phil Seth.
Thanks. So in the staff report, there's some discussion on the schools, a couple things. There's some discussion about public schools or private schools and so forth. If we pass this tonight, does that cover both or just public schools?
We did not include private schools in the draft ordinance, but that is an option that's available for council tonight.
Is there any reason, I mean, they're all kids, right? Is there any reason we wouldn't
So
include private schools?
some of the reasons I've heard, well, there's really two reasons. A lot of the private schools don't serve neighborhoods directly, so they have more automobile commuters. So you might not have the same safety issues that you do with the high number of bicyclists and pedestrians at public schools that are neighborhood serving. The other difference with some of our private schools is that they're in rented facilities, so they could move. So we could make a substantial investment in speed limit signage and markings that we would make around a school, and then they could move to another location. That doesn't happen that often, but that is a concern.
I was going to say that probably doesn't happen very often, huh? I sort of think I'm going to ask the maker and the seconder of the motion in a second here. I sort of think we ought to, I mean, they're all kids, so we ought to consider private schools as well. But on the issue of some streets may be different and car traffic and so forth, is that the kind of thing that staff could make a judgment on a case-by-case basis if we gave you the latitude?
Yeah, we would use the same analysis that we used for the public schools and then apply it to private schools.
Okay. So I'm going to propose a friendly amendment that the motion cover private schools as well.
And I actually would have included that, but I have no idea how many private schools there are.
You said there were 10, huh?
Only 10?
10 is what we've documented.
So can I just
Who's looking
we,
at?
we did some looking online, and online it says there are 25.
It certainly seems like there are a lot more than 10, to be honest. You know, could we put it in as a tentative and say, after finding out where the public schools are and what kind of impact it has, we could include public schools?
When you say tentative, that means staff would make a judgment, it wouldn't have to come back to
No,
council?
it's a staff judgment. But there are, I think, far more private schools than one would think, and it may include nursery schools and, you know, any other kind of school, maybe even one that does tutoring. So I think we'll leave it to your good judgment, but also give us an informational report back.
Could I just ask the city attorney how much flexibility we have to modify the draft ordinance based on the motion?
But there are more than 10, I know.
Okay, so we could come back with another ordinance on consent that included private schools, if that's acceptable.
Okay
Well,
with me?
I don't know, it might not work for me. The only question I have is, I mean, I'm thinking where Castellet is. I don't want to see a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on Embarcadero there, and I don't think the kids walk there anyway. So I'm just not sure what your methodology is, and so I want to know, I want to basically make sure that it doesn't include Embarcadero. What are you thinking? You're looking.
Well, I think we could come back to you with an ordinance that had the specific streets, and we would use our judgment similar to what we did for the public schools.
So I guess I would agree as long as it doesn't include Embarcadero. As long as we put that in.
Or any other really challenging street.
I don't think it should include Embarcadero or El Camino or something.
Right,
like that.
no El Camino, no, that's right, no El Camino, no Embarcadero.
Right.
Where does it include Embarcadero?
I think maybe you'd better come back to us, to be quite honest.
Yeah, so I could clarify, though, we were not able to reduce the speed limit on multi-lane roads to 20 miles an hour. So Embarcadero would be excluded.
Okay, so all multi-lane roads, so El
Yes.
Camino, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was worried about our arterials.
Yeah, but I think the city attorney opinion is that we would have to come back with another ordinance because it wasn't noticed as part of this item.
And in case somebody wants to speak to it at that point.
Okay. Fair enough. It's accepted then.
Okay, super, thank you. Just a couple questions about the Deer Creek and East Bay Shore. Actually, I wanted to ask a question about in your outreach meetings where you said there was public opposition to raising speed limits. Did they understand it was about enforcement as opposed to getting people to drive faster?
Yeah, we gave them quite a bit of background on the reasoning and the state law, and the goal would be to actually get more enforcement out there. And there's just a immediate negative reaction to raising speed limits, especially on the residential arterial streets.
It's interesting. I know people that say, don't raise the speed limit on Embarcadero because I like driving fast and I don't want to get a ticket. I mean, I actually know people that do that. I don't think that's good policy. But, okay. On Deer Creek and East Bay Shore, so the goal here is radar enforcement as opposed to we think that people should just drive faster on those roads. Is there any accident history on those roads of significance?
Yes, so for Deer Creek Road, we have about approximately 5,000 vehicles per day is the average daily traffic that's been measured, and the collision rate is about 0.7. I don't have the number of collisions that we looked into with me. It was 5 over a period of 5 years.
Is that high or low or nominal?
Below state average, whereas East Bay Shore is above state average. It's about at least the East Bay Shore between Embarcadero and Bay Landing, it's 3.8. State average is about 1.22.
So then the issue on East Bay Shore would be if we think raising the speed limit and more enforcement will reduce the accident rate. Is that the thinking? Then we'd have to actually enforce. Right?
Yes, but a higher accident rate also allows you to reduce the posted speed limit by 5 miles per hour if we elected to, from what you calculate. So we could, that's how we arrived at the 40 miles an hour, right? So if we were to follow the strict letter of the state law, we would actually need to increase East Bay Shore to 45 miles an hour. But under state law, if there's a high collision rate, you can actually round down another 5 miles an hour and still do radar enforcement. So that's how we arrived at the 40 miles an hour.
Okay. Are we going to check and see if the accident rate goes up on East Bay Shore after we do this?
Yeah, so one of the things Ruchika and Raphael will be working on, he's the other member of our traffic safety and operations team. We've implemented a program called Crossroads, which is being used throughout Santa Clara County, and that's a collision history database. And we've started pulling top 10 crash locations, and Middlefield and Forest is actually on that top 10 list. And they're going to start strategically working through that list and implementing traffic safety improvements and signal timing changes and other things that address the collision histories at those locations.
Right. I mean, I understand the thought process. It seems a little counterintuitive to raise the speed limit, okay, on a road where there's a higher than average collision rate, right? So, but I understand the thought process, and so I hope we'll monitor it. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for your work on this. Overall, I thought it was really, really good. I have a few quick questions for you. So in the staff report, I saw parts where it said the speed limit around schools reduced to 20 miles per hour, but then also saw it at 15 miles per hour, and I wasn't quite sure which one it really was, and I saw your presentation today, and so I just want to know maybe clarify which one is it really?
So the state law, which was passed in 2012, allows cities to do either 20 or 15 within 500 feet of the school grounds. Staff is recommending 20, but it's well within council's purview to instead go with 15.
Okay. And then in terms of the reduced speed limit, is that going to affect the bus schedules at all around the schools?
No, it should not.
Okay. For me, I actually spend most of the time either biking or longboarding around Palo Alto, so I have a great appreciation for slower traffic. I changed my route to get to City Hall now to actually go up North California, just because of the fact that what the mayor said in terms of cars go slower there. So actually, I think what you did there actually seems to be working in terms of slowing traffic. And one of the things I've heard from a lot of residents is the speed problems on Middlefield, and I understand the constraints around that. But I think the thing that you said today that I thought was really seems to be spot on to me is the idea of instead of trying to enforce a speed limit, rather to try to design the road so that it causes people just to drive slower, right? And because it's, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we still don't have a traffic team, right? That's dedicated, yeah, so we don't, okay, so we still don't have a traffic team to enforce speed limits. So if that's the case, I think this kind of idea of auto enforcement, or what was the term you used again? Design for speed?
Target speed.
Target speed, yeah, target speed. Seems to make a lot of sense, actually, to me. So one recommendation I wanted to make, and it's something which I've seen a lot of other cities do, is, and this is for streets that have bike lanes and parked cars, and maybe you've seen it as well, but I haven't seen it much here in Palo Alto, is to flip the bike lanes and cars around, the parked cars, and so you have a protected bike lane. And so, I mean, before I make a proposal, can you comment on that?
Yeah, those are, in California, they're called Class 4 separated bikeways. One of the difficulties installing those is that when you flip the parking lane and the bike lane, you need a buffer of at least 3 feet. And you don't need that same buffer if the bike lane is adjacent to the travel lane. So in a lot of cases, we don't have the roadway width to implement that. But we are looking, you know, whenever we are building new bikeways, that's the first kind of class of bikeway that we consider because it provides separation, especially for families and children. And but it is hard to fit those into constrained environments.
Well, for any of the study segments, would it make, I mean, could it fit on any of the study segments? Because I think, you know, one of the things that we're trying to do here is trying to encourage more people to bike, right, for instance. But if people don't feel safe, right, because, you know, they have a car going 40 miles an hour next to them, then they're probably not going to bike, they're probably going to drive, right, which causes more of the problem. So, so I was just thinking about what you were saying in terms of having a target design speed, and the fact that we don't have, it's really expensive and hard for us to have active enforcement, whether we could design the roads where it encourages more biking, slows the traffic down, not through getting a ticket, but just because of the psychological effect. So I guess how many of the study segments, I mean, first of all, are you already actively trying to do this, or does this have to be part of the motion? What's the status?
No, we're actively trying to implement the highest quality bikeway we can when we're designing bike facilities. The Charleston Arrastradero project actually includes some parking protected bikeway segments on the section west of El Camino, and that'll be starting construction next year. We've gotten a grant to do a parking protected bike lane along East Meadow Drive. That's not one of the study segments tonight, but we are at, you know, whenever they can fit, that's the first type of bikeway that we try to consider.
So I was listening to Councilmember Holman's comment about college. So I live right next to college, and she's right. It's a super wide street, and you know we got traffic circles, and we're trying to, you know, we fiddle with the stop signs, and but Councilmember Holman's right. Cars go fast on that street, especially where I am on Princeton. So why not have protected bike lanes on that street? Because that street is more than wide enough.
So I promise you tonight we'll go ahead and do a speed survey on College Avenue and see what the travel speeds are there, and then we'll work with the police department. We can also go out and look at, you know, if there's ways to reconfigure the cross section. But you know, we then have to find the funding to implement that type of project. But I promise you tonight we'll go ahead and get a speed survey in the works for that corridor.
Okay, I guess it's, you know, of course I'd love to get college because that's where I live, but I guess for me it's also just trying to get protected bike lanes in as many places in the city as possible, just because it seems like a cheap, easy way of getting the speed we want, but encouraging more biking, which reduces traffic. So does this have to be part of the motion, or you're like, if this is already happening? I'm not sure.
I think it's already happening. Okay. If you wanted to encourage us to look at implementing bikeways as part of the design around target speed, I mean, that would certainly be appropriate, but we're already doing that.
Okay, I think we're fine then. Thank you.
Councilmember Walbach.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I'm not going to make any amendments, but, or actually just a question first. Just my own anecdotal experience, it seems that a lot of the backup and congestion on Embarcadero is from people turning left off of Embarcadero without a protected lane. meaning they stop in the middle of the number one lane, the one closest to the median, trying to make a left turn, and so people back up behind them. And then when, people will swerve out of the number one lane into the number two lane to get around them, and then speed up to make up, thinking they can make up for the lost time. And I'm just curious if reducing unprotected left turns by either adding protection for left turns or having no left turn signs and making people do three rights, are those the kinds of things among the menu of tools you might use?
Yes, but, if you talk about restricting left turns, that's something that would require, quite a bit of community engagement and neighborhood outreach. So we are open to those types of treatments. We have identified, for example, a collision pattern at Cowper and Embarcadero that could be addressed by restricting left turns, and that's something we're probably going to be surfacing at the neighborhood shortly.
Yeah, I think those are the kinds of things that are worth discussing. I would hope that you do more outreach in the community and maybe even bring it back to council before you move forward with it, but I'm glad you're looking at those kinds of options. I just want to say, in general, aesthetics are important. I think Councilmember Fine might have been kind of getting at this earlier, when it comes to signs, when it comes to, to the street design, I'm not making specific recommendations, just I think it's important to keep in mind that aesthetics matter. When it comes to speed bumps, speed humps, personally not a big fan. I hear a lot of people complaining about them. If your goal is to have more, if our goal is really to have even but moderated speeds, I think, at least my experience, and I think I hear a lot from community members, tell me if you think it's different as the experts. A lot of times people will slow down for the bump and then speed up again to make up for lost time. So I think it's just adds aggravation, doesn't seem to add to that smooth but slow speed. And also, both for motorcyclists and for bicyclists, just want to make sure that safety is really you keep that in mind. I think in particular of the intersection of Lewis, where it hits Charleston. You have a series of really small little bumps right in the middle of the median to dissuade people from crossing over, but they're almost invisible. And it's really a death trap for anyone on a scooter or a motorcycle. I mean, I've never hit it myself, but it's something that would basically punish somebody with injury for hitting it rather than something that's visible that would dissuade them from crossing over. So I just want to point out that example and hope that we don't do things like that. We want to have those visuals that are easy to see, that'll slow people down, not endanger them. And I will be supporting the motion. Thanks.
Councilmember Koo.
More of a question. When it comes to bicycle lanes, as what Councilmember Tanaka said, why do we not separate the bicycles from moving cars? Maybe by putting the parked cars between the moving cars and the bicycles.
So on streets where we have enough width to do that, that would be the first configuration we would consider. But as I mentioned earlier, there's design criteria around those that require a buffer between the parked cars and the bike lane for doors opening. And that eats up a lot of space that the bike lanes adjacent to the travel lane don't require. So you need an additional 6 feet, basically, of width in order to implement those.
Side.
Yeah. So where we can fit them, we will, but they can't fit on every roadway.
Right, I understand that, especially near the wider streets that go to school where there's a lot of bicyclists using it. That might, I don't know if you still can consider that something for Arostadero or Charleston.
So there are segments of parking protected bike lanes planned on Arostadero Road as part of the reconfiguration.
Is it at the front, closer to El Camino?
Between El Camino and Terman.
Okay.
There's a couple segments that'll be parking protected. And then we've gotten a grant to do a parking protected bike lane along East Meadow between Alma and Fabian.
Okay, I saw that on your chart in yours. Yeah, so that's what I always think is, why is it that the bicyclists, just something to buffer them and separate them from moving cars? It's heart-stopping every time you watch them riding on the street. next to the cars, and when they overtake each other, they actually come out onto the street in front of traffic. So there's not expected movement coming from them. Thanks.
All right. I believe everyone has spoken.
I just want to ask about the...
Oh, so the question is, you didn't get back to Vice Mayor Niss on her question. You were looking it up?
I asked you how the Middlefield North on University Avenue, how it was being received, and was it being successful?
So we're coming to you with an information report on that project in December that'll have a complete collection of data that we collected both before the pilot was implemented and then we collected in October as well. And it'll report the impacts to the neighborhood streets, the collision history, the speeds, the volumes. We're also doing a neighborhood survey. Do you want to talk a little bit about the survey?
So as a part of the evaluation, we sent out postcards to the residents in that vicinity, and so far we've received about 115 survey responses, which is much higher than the response rate that we received at the beginning of the pilot. So in addition to what Josh mentioned about speed, volume, we are also making analysis on our signal timing and taking feedback from transit agencies, police department, and compiling the report and bringing it up for council on December 11th. So.
But overall, anecdotally, are you...
It's been pretty quiet. We haven't heard a lot from the community since it was implemented. Yeah.
Good to hear. Okay, thanks.
All right, for good vote on the board. And that passes unanimously with Councilmember Du Bois absent. All right, and that brings us to any council member questions, comments, announcements. Councilmember Holman.
I'm just wondering, because of slide number 11, I'm just wondering if we have an ordinance that prohibits polishing, repairing, and washing cars in parks. Look at the image, you'll see why I ask.
All right, no one else? The meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
And look, I want to see that this makes up for last night.
Yeah.
I'm averaging.
Although great, actually we have two council meetings tonight in a row, right? If you make some words,
Thank you for that.